So I already went ahead and pulled off this so I could do the compression test. They're 10mm bolts, and we'll go ahead and disconnect the connector and just pull our coils off. So there's a lot that needs to come off. You can start pretty much wherever you'd like. Let's start with the exhaust. That feels good to me. Now, on the exhaust shield, there are 4 bolts. I already got those off. I thought I was recording, but wasn't. We can unplug the O2 sensor. There we go. And then pull this shield off. Of course, we can't do that without unbolting this. So I like leaving bolts either with the part that I took off or bolted back on where the bolts came out. Either one, just so when it comes time to put it all back together, we're relatively organized. Now this, we'll pull off these right here. They're just 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like 5 nuts that come off. Now on this one here by the alternator, we're gonna have to take the alternator off later anyway. So if you want to take the alternator off now before this nut, go for it. But if you have a ratcheting wrench, or if you're patient with just a standard wrench, you can get it off now. But just the fact that all of them broke loose without breaking any of the studs or anything like that is enough to make me happy. So you can see there's a bolt right there. And then on the other side, there's just another bolt right there. I believe they're 14mm, just those 2 bolts. We don't have to pull it off of the catalytic converter. We don't have to pull it off of this, just what bolts to the engine. All right, so now we have 2 bolts on this, bolted into the catalytic converter. Let's find the right size. So mine are a 17. Let's see if these will come off. Yeah, that wasn't bad. Actually a little shocked. All right, so that's loose, so it should come off up top. Let's see what else we can do while we're down here. So this is the back of, or the bottom of the intake manifold. If you notice, right there is a bolt, and then over here there's a bolt right there. So 2 bolts underneath that we can get while we're down here. I believe they're 12mm. All right, back up top. I believe this is ready. There we go. That comes straight up and out. So now let's work on pulling the intake manifold off. So we'll just pull this air filter box off, just the top of it. So we can pull the mass airflow sensor, unplug that. There's the purge solenoid connector, we'll unplug that. And then another little solenoid or valve or something on this side. This hose can come off here. We have another hose that can come off down here. Well, we'll leave it on down there. We'll actually pull it off up here. It's just easier to get to. We'll just twist the hose, pop it off. We got this hose. We might have to replace it as well, but we'll try to twist it and pop it off. Maybe it'll pop out of here better. And then there's a clamp right here where the intake duct goes into the manifold or throttle body. Get a pair of pliers. I might need a bigger pair of pliers. All right, now we can disconnect our throttle body connector. Now there's a bracket that holds on that throttle body connector and the fuel rail. I'm just gonna pull that 1 bolt out so that this bracket can come out as 1 unit instead of trying to disconnect this and pull out the fuel line. I believe the head gasket kit comes with a new throttle body gasket, so this throttle body will probably be coming off of the intake manifold anyway. But there we go. Now there's 2 hoses back here, coolant hoses that need to come off, and they're connected to the throttle body. Just with a pair of pliers, they'll come off. Give them a twist, and they'll unstick, and then we'll just pull them off. Now you'll probably lose some coolant. That's okay. At some point we want to drain the radiator anyway, but usually it's not a lot that comes out of these. I lied, it's a lot. Let me plug those back up. And so I'm gonna get a catch pan and we'll go ahead and drain the radiator now. All right, so while that's draining, we're gonna go ahead and continue with our dismantling. We wanna unplug the fuel injectors. There's 4 of them. And then this VVT solenoid in the back. Just unplug. Then we can pull this whole harness up and out of the way. Then we can unbolt the fuel rail, 12mm bolts. Have safety goggles on while you're doing this, just in case. So now we can pull it up. There we go. We don't have to disconnect the fuel line. We just take this whole rail and have it slide over and just out of our way. Now we have access to our top bolts. I believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top bolts. 12mm. Need an extension for that one. Now this one towards the front is right underneath the VVT solenoid. It might be in your way. See if I can get it without disconnecting a bunch of stuff over here. I'm probably totally in your way, but that's okay. There we go. All right, got all those bolts. Now there is this hose here. I believe it goes to the brake booster. Just a 10 mil, we want to pull that off. It's just a bracket. All right, I think that's it. If I'm not mistaken, there is one more hose on the side down here, but we'll get to it as it comes up. Yeah, just one more hose right here that will pull off. In fact, you can leave it on and unplug it back here, unplug it against the firewall, and then we won't accidentally forget it before we put the manifold back on. So pulling in the hose off in a spot that's easy to see can help us in the future. Alrighty. All right, so now let's focus on getting what we need to off of the front here. We're gonna pull this torque strut off. We got this grounding strap. We'll go ahead and just pull it off up here. That bolt back. Pull this off. Yeah, we'll use a breaker bar for that one. So that comes off. We can pull this off the alternator. Really, all these plugs can be unplugged near the alternator, just so that this harness has more freedom to move. Which reminds me, we should also unplug or disconnect the battery cables before we do too much around the alternator. So I'll do that real quick. It's just good practice. We don't want to short anything out. It will mess up your engine computer, or has the potential to. Also, before I forget, you want to stuff a rag in the exhaust. It'd suck if you dropped a bolt down the exhaust pipe. So the belt tensioner broke trying to get the serpentine belt off. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off. So we'll need a new tensioner and a new belt. If you have to do this, just be really careful. There's a lot of tension on these. Trying to find the best way to get in there. Okay, watch yourself. Make sure nothing is in the way that's going to get damaged. There we go. All right, so now we'll go ahead and pull the alternator off. Got a 14 up top and a 12 on the bottom. A little wiggling and a jiggling. Comes out. All right, AC compressor should have, looks like 4 bolts, 12mm. So I'm gonna pull this radiator hose out of the way. A pick like this is great for breaking loose hoses. So I'm able to get to 3 of them with just a socket and a ratchet, but this refrigerant hose is in the way. So I'm gonna pull out what I can, and I think I can get a ratcheting wrench in there for the last one, because I don't wanna have to evacuate the refrigerant. But I mean, if we do have to, we got the equipment for it, but I'm hoping we don't have to. Just a ratcheting wrench like this, and it doesn't look like my ratcheting wrench will fit in there. It's gonna take forever. Okay, got it loose. I'm just gonna wiggle on it and pull it out with my fingers little by little. Okay, so it's off. I think that can just get left to the side here. Let me show you real quick. So the AC compressor, this bolt right here, you can't really get off because that hose, that line's in the way. So I just unbolted the other 3 and then did this one with my fingers. Once I cracked it loose, did it with my fingers, and then just slowly backed this out, and there it is. And so it'll just sit here and just rest out of the way. As long as it's disconnected from the engine, that's all we care about. So now we want to go over and do the power steering pump on the other side of the engine and get that disconnected and just laid out of the way as well. The lighting might not be the best. We got two 10mm bolts holding this cover on. All right, now that gives us access, better access anyway, to our engine mount here we want to pull off. We don't have to pull off the whole mount. We just have to pull off this top piece here, I believe. We'll see. We may have to pull off the whole thing, but I believe it's just this top nut. Here, let me show you. This top nut here, because the engine will be lifted up off of it. So we don't have to pull this whole thing out. So let's clean it off real well. I want to say it's a 19mm. Hopefully it'll come out without too much of a fight. Oh, mama. Let me get a breaker bar. All right, I have a breaker bar. I'm gonna bring it around. Nope, that's not gonna work. All right, let me see. Oh, yeah. That wasn't bad with the breaker bar. All right, that's off. Now let's see what we gotta do for our power steering pump. I think we have to pull off the tensioner. All right, change of plan. So I'm gonna leave the power steering pump on, but I'm just gonna disconnect the hoses. They're easy to get to from up top. So we'll go ahead and do that, put a drip pan underneath to collect any of the fluid that comes out, but just pull the lines off, leave the pump on, that'll be easier. And really, to be honest, we're just pulling off anything that is connected to the engine from the rest of the body of the vehicle, because we're pulling this whole thing out as one. So there's really not necessarily like a step-by-step list. You're just trying to get anything that looks attached off of the engine so that it's separated completely from the body, and then we'll pull it off. So that's how I'm gonna address the power steering pump. Just pull the lines off, easy peasy. So you don't have to pull the tensioner off or anything like that. So let me do that, and then this side is done. There is, grab my light, back here, a mounting bracket for your CV axle. So we'll go ahead and unbolt it here. The axle doesn't have to come out. We just want to unbolt it from the engine. Just a couple of 14 mil, I believe they are. So we'll crawl under the vehicle, do that real quick. And then this whole side is done. The front is done. The back is done. So now we just hop over to the transmission side and get everything disconnected from there. So we're almost there. All right, so I finished everything over there. Underneath, I was able to get the axle bearing bolts. There were 3 of those. There were 4 transmission bolts I got as well while under there, and then 2 more exhaust bolts that were under there I ended up getting. So I believe everything underneath is done. Everything on this side is done. So now we just have the transmission side that we're gonna work on. Pull the box out. We'll pull the starter motor as well. This mount in the front is connected to the transmission, so don't need to pull that. We do have these heater core hoses we can get. Pull those off. All right, got those off. That can stay on there. Now we have to get rid of this wiring harness connected to the back. Let me figure that one out. Looks like maybe there's a little bolt down there. All right, one little bolt. Holding that on. Now that's free and loose. All right, there's a ground strap back there and one connector. There we go. Got it. So now we just have the transmission bolt. Figure out what size they are. 17mm. Leave that in a few threads. See if we can get that one. Looks like a different size. So we may have to remove this front mount just to get to that bolt down there. Then once we get the bolt off, we can put that mount back. So let me do that real quick. It still has the front motor mount, so I'm not worried about pulling this off. I have a jack under it anyway, just in case, but I don't think there's a big issue with pulling this off. Just so you can see, I'm just pulling this front motor mount off. It's bolted to the transmission. Now that gives me access to that bolt. Yeah, perfect. That bottom bolt's a 14. All right, I think that is everything. I got all the transmission bell housing bolts off. I got 5 altogether on this one. Oh, 5 on the top. I think 4 on the bottom. So the top had 2 14mm bolts and 3 17mm bolts. So I'm gonna take the hood off next and then pull the car forward, just push it forward just a little so we can get the hoist on it. Doing this one person is kind of hard. It's nice to have a partner. So this shock comes off. I'll lower this as much as possible and just pull these off. Let's do our best not to scratch it. Looks good. Pull it up from the front and then I'll set it down somewhere. Coming your way. Nice, that's it. So, let me push the car forward and we'll get the hoist. I have a roof mounted or a ceiling mounted hoist. So we'll get this rolled under. This engine's ready to come up. All right, hopefully I got everything. So right now I'm just separating the engine from the bell housing. All right, I'm a dork. I forgot to unbolt the flywheel bolts. No big deal. I'll go under, show you where they are, how you get access to them, and just pull those out. There should be 6 altogether. All right, underneath the vehicle from the passenger side looking towards the transmission, there's a little black square cover right there. I already took it off, and that reveals all the bolts. Well, it reveals one at a time. You have to turn the engine to reveal all the others. All right, my battery died. Where were we? I unbolted the torque converter from the flywheel, so that is done. I'm lowering the vehicle. I had it jacked up so I can get under there for the bolts. So now I'm just lowering it. I think I'm pretty home free. Still moving it away from the transmission a little as I go up with it. Oh, there we go. That was a good little move. Still going up. Just checking stuff, making sure I'm not pulling on any wiring or anything like that while going up. Okay, still looking good. So the engine isn't necessarily going up at this moment, the car is going down. Okay, looking good, looking good. All right, that's it. So the vehicle is down on the ground all the way. So now I'll lift the engine up with the hoist. Okay, what's it on? Good, good. All right, looks like that's it. We are free of everything. I'm just gonna turn this real quick. The only reason why I'm doing that is because my cable up here, it got crisscross. Now that was probably my fault, hooking it up. All right, go up the rest of the way. So now what I'm gonna do is just push the car back, leave the engine where it is, push the car backwards, and get this on an engine stand. And we are done with this video. So now we're gonna get the engine off of the stand. We'll put our piece on. All right, now we unbolt it from the stand. All right, now we're gonna pull the car underneath it, lower it in, and get it all set. like the engine is in. I didn't realize my microphone died on us, so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of recap and highlight some of the tips and struggles that I was having. All right, so first off, that motor mount in the front, that transmission mount, leave it bolted. I unbolted it so I can get more lift on the transmission, but what ends up happening is the transmission sways over to the side and it doesn't quite line up. I was having a lot of trouble lining up the engine with the bell housing of the transmission, a lot of it due to that. So just bolt it back in. Still a good idea to jack up the front of the bell housing of the transmission, but leave that on. So that's important. Other than that, as you're dropping it in, this harness here, you just have to finesse it around and back up because it does go across the top of the engine. So that was the only other thing. Other than that, it came in. You just have to make sure you're the right level, the right tilt and angle and everything. And you get these dowels in. There's a dowel, I think, somewhere around here. And then there's a dowel on the other side. Once those line up, it'll pretty much just kind of fall into place. What you don't want to do is take a bolt and thread it in and try to suck it in before it's ready. And you can damage some things, especially the flywheel, if it's getting bound up on something before it's ready to go in, or the torque converter or something like that before it's all ready to slide into place. It'll fall in and you'll go, ah, yeah, nice. And then we can go ahead and put our bolts in. So we got our bolts in. That'll be next, is just bolting the transmission up, going underneath, bolting the flywheel up to the torque converter, and then we got our front motor mount on, but we'll bolt and tighten all that stuff up. So I put this on, just a side note, I put this on first. I'd go ahead and leave it off if you want to torque this nut for the exhaust. Otherwise, you just have to use it for a wrench. So we could torque all these, but I'll get a good wrench feel on that one. I think other than that, right now it's just a matter of buttoning everything back together. Again, we'll start with the transmission bolts, and then we'll go do that wiring harness on the back side, the AC compressor to put on, and then the serpentine belt. So not a whole lot, maybe a few more hours of just buttoning everything back together, the exhaust, the intake, and all that. We'll be ready to fire this beast up. We got all our bell housing bolts tightened up and the flywheel bolts to the torque converter. That's important to put Loctite on those. So that's what they call for, Loctite. Now we're gonna put the exhaust on. So we got a new gasket. It looks like it was leaking. Not sure if the camera picked it up, but all that black soot was from an exhaust leak prior. But we got a new gasket on there, Now we'll go ahead and set our manifold converter on and bolt that down. The spec I have on the exhaust bolts is 27 foot-pounds. And they're a 12 mil, not a 14. All right, just like anything else, start in the middle. And this bottom one above the alternator, we'll just have to get it the best we can. All right, feels good. We got those two bolts holding the converter onto the engine. Put our heat shield on. Start plugging in our wiring harness stuff. I just want to show you where I am. So I went ahead and just put all this on. It's just plugging hoses in where they go. Yeah, connectors go where they go. This harness back here, this one, there's a bolt down below that secures it to the head. Very hard to get to, but just do your best to try to get it on there. It is clipped on to two different brackets in the back, so you know, it's really secure in there, but just try to get that bolt in there. This right here, that big plastic leg, it goes underneath the cam position sensor. So there's that. I can get put in. This plastic stuff's kind of hard to work with, but do your best. So yeah, just all plugged in. Excuse me. Grounding straps. Be sure that you have all your grounding. There's one down below. I can't see it. It's under here. It belongs to one of these black wires that grounds through the transmission bolt. So one of the transmission bolts. Other than that, so this side is pretty much buttoned up, other than the airbox stuff, which I'll do that last. got this. We still have this to do here. So still got this to do, and the intake manifold. Kind of dark back here, but I put the power steering pump lines on, and I think that's it. There's a little, I guess, styrofoam piece we'll put back before the intake manifold goes back on. Everything was going so smooth, I just went ahead and put it all back together. This harness here is for the injectors. We're gonna leave them unplugged. We're gonna crank it over and just get that oil pump to start sucking up oil, get some oil flowing at a lower cranking RPM. We did end up getting a new torque strut. They were cheap enough, so just went ahead and put one in for the customer. Also, new hoses. Got this PCV hose and a new PCV valve. And this hose here, we just went ahead and slapped on. No big deal. Intake manifold, new gasket. The throttle body, new gasket. All right, we got the new air filter in. We don't want to forget filling it up with oil. So next I'm going to fill up the coolant. Make sure our drain plug is shut. And then as we're filling it up, just watch for any leaks. And I lost a little transmission fluid, so I'll top that off as well. Injector's unplugged, so it won't start. Let's crank it over. Gotta hook up the battery. That'd be helpful. And we want to crank it long enough for our oil light to go out. We've already cranked it over enough for it to go out, but let me just crank it over again and you'll watch that light go out. And that's what you want. So once the light's out, we know that there's enough oil pressure. The pump is working. There's oil flowing throughout the engine. All right, time to fire it up for reals. I got the injectors back in place. One thing else also to check is to make sure that you're not leaking any fuel. When we did the pre-start, just to get the oil pumped up, the fuel rail should have pumped up with fuel. We just check around our injectors and fuel rail to make sure we're not leaking. Everything looks good. Double check to see if there's any reasons why we shouldn't proceed. And I don't see any reason. Let's do it. Sounds good. Things will be smoking a little because of grease and stuff getting on the exhaust and all that stuff. That's normal. That will burn off and go away. Also, when doing this, we want to keep an eye on that temperature gauge as well, just to be sure we're not overheating.